I want you to picture something. It's a photograph from the Philippines. There's a flood, waist-deep, muddy water just filling the streets.
Okay.
And wading through it are people soaking wet, holding their stuff up above their heads. But here's the thing, they're laughing. They're smiling right at the camera.
It's an image we see a lot,
Mm-hmm.
in disaster coverage. It's the visual shorthand for the indomitable human spirit.
Exactly. And we usually look at that and we say, wow, look at that resilience, look at that strength, and it feels good to see it. But today, we're going to ask a, very uncomfortable question.
Hmm.
Is that laughter actually a problem? Is that resilience admirable, or is it a symptom of something much, much darker?
It's a provocative question, for sure. But when you dig into the research we have today, you start to see that this ability to just bounce back while it saves your sanity in the moment might be the very thing that keeps a broken system broken.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're unpacking what we're calling the architecture of dysfunction. We've got a snack of sources that are, honestly, a little terrifying, but fascinating.
They really are.
We're looking at op-eds on toxic resilience from Business World, a massive deep dive into malfunctioning democracies from economists at UC Berkeley, and a really critical look at social work and poverty from social development issues.
And our mission today is to connect some dots that usually don't get connected. We're going to trace a line from that individual coping mechanism, that laughter in the flood, all the way up to why governments fail, why courts get captured.
And why sometimes the people who are trying to help might actually be making it worse.
It's quite a web.
So let's start with that image of the flood. This comes from an op-ed by Benel Lagua, and he references a conversation with Dr. Horacio Borromeo. They talk about this specific cultural trait in the Philippines called bahala na.
Right, bahala na. It roughly translates to come what may. It's this sort of fatalistic, deeply ingrained attitude.
And on the surface, that sounds like a survival skill, right? I mean, if you can't control the storm, you ride it out, you surrender.
It is a survival skill, and that is the trap. Lagua and Borromeo argue that while this trait helps people survive the trauma of the moment, it leads to what they call toxic resilience.
Toxic resilience. That's a heavy term. It implies the medicine is actually poison.
It is, in a way. Think about it like this. If you adapt to walking through waist-deep water every single year, if you learn to laugh about it, if you make memes about it, what aren't you doing?
You're not screaming at the mayor. You're not asking why the drainage system hasn't been fixed in 20 years.
Exactly. You stop asking about the government ineptitude and the corruption that contributed to the flood in the first place. The source argues this creates a short memory. People survive, they move on. And because they move on so quickly, they don't demand accountability.
So the resilience of the people becomes a kind of shield for the incompetence of the leaders.
Yes,
The politicians are basically relying on you getting over it.
precisely. It normalizes suffering. And Lagua points out, this allows corrupt leaders to be recycled over and over again. The populace is just too busy surviving to hold them accountable.
Okay, so that's the psychological trap. We're almost too resilient for our own good. But let's say the water recedes. People dry off. They decide, you know what? I'm mad. I'm going to vote this guy out.
Right.
This is where we hit the next layer of the architecture.
And this brings us to that Berkeley paper on malfunctioning democracies. They talk about vertical accountability.
Which is just a fancy way of saying voters firing politicians, right?
Basically, it's the citizens looking up at their leaders and disciplining them with elections. But the sources show that in many developing democracies, that vertical line is, well, it's cut. It's severed by three specific tools: violence, fraud, and vote buying.
Let's unpack those because the examples in this research are just wild. Start with violence. The assumption is simply, bad guys scare voters. But the sources mention a study from Afghanistan that I found incredible. It involved clouds.
Yes, this is a fascinating study. Researchers wanted to measure how insurgent violence suppresses voter turnout, but obviously, violence isn't random. So they used wind and cloud cover as a variable.
Because insurgents don't attack when the weather's bad.
Exactly. It's harder to coordinate in poor weather. And they found that on days with clear skies, good fighting weather-insurgent violence reduced voter turnout by 9 to 14%.
That is a massive swing. If you can shave 14% off your opponent's turnout just by making people terrified to leave their house, you win.
And it's not just general terror.
Yeah.
It's targeted. The sources bring up the Maguindanao massacre in the Philippines. 58 people killed. 32 of them were journalists.
So 32 journalists, that sends a chill down my spine.
Well, when you have that level of violence, the cost of running for office, or even just reporting on it, it becomes fatal. It creates a barrier. Good people don't run because they don't want to die.
Okay, so strategy 1 is scare them away. If that doesn't work, strategy 2 is rig the count. The fraud section of this deep dive had some real spy movie stuff in it. Tell us about the photo quick count.
This is such a great example of how we know fraud happens. In Afghanistan's 2010 election, researchers realized that a lot of the cheating wasn't happening at the ballot box.
Ah, it was happening later?
It was happening when the numbers were being aggregated up the chain, someone in a back room changing a 10 to 100.
Right.
So they had people take photos of the tally sheets right there at the polling station before they would send up the line. And just the act of taking that photo, it reduced fraud by about 25% for candidates who were connected to the powerful elite.
Just knowing they were being watched changed the math.
It proves that without that transparency, the numbers are being cooked. There's another study, this one from Mexico, where they use machine learning neural networks to scan the tally sheets.
Like looking for handwriting changes.
Yes. The AI could detect if the handwriting was altered or if numbers were crossed out and rewritten. And guess where they found the most tampering?
Let me guess, places where nobody was watching.
Exactly. Areas without opposition monitors and where the local governor had strong ties to the ruling party.
Okay, so strategy 1 is violence, 2 is fraud. But strategy 3 feels the most insidious because it looks like help. Vote buying.
Yeah. This is where it gets really complicated. Because in many places, a vote is a commodity. The sources list the menu prices for a vote found in different studies. In Thailand, it was around $27. Paraguay, $48.
$48 in Paraguay. For a family living in poverty, that's not insignificant.
No, it's not.
That's food. That's medicine.
And that's why it works.
Huh.
But it's not just cash. The Brazil study is mind-blowing. It showed that if you have a connection to the ruling party, your chances of getting a public sector job go up by 47%.
47%. So it's not just, here's $50.
It's here's your livelihood. And it creates what they call a trap of reciprocity. The researchers explained that the brokers, the local guys handing out the money, they know exactly who to target.
They target people who will feel obligated.
They target reciprocal people, people who feel a moral obligation.
Wait, so they weaponize your conscience.
They do. If I give you money, you feel morally bad if you don't vote for my guy. So you do it. It's not just a transaction. It's an emotional manipulation.
That is incredibly dark. So we have a resilient population that's used to suffering. If they try to vote, they face violence. If they brave the violence, their vote might be changed by fraud. And if they're poor, they might just be bought off because they need to eat.
And that just destroys vertical accountability. The voters cannot fire the leaders.
But wait, in a democracy, isn't there supposed to be a referee? If the politician cheats, surely the courts step in.
This brings us to horizontal accountability. These are the checks and balances, the courts, the auditors. And the news here is, well, it's not great.
I assume judicial capture is the phrase of the day.
Unfortunately, yes. The sources detail how politicians neutralize the courts. And again, it's not always a man with a gun.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a house.
A house.
There's a study from Pakistan mentioned in the Berkeley paper. It showed that judges who received government housing were 50% more likely to rule in favor of the government.
50% for a house.
And in India, they looked at judges nearing retirement age 65. They found that these judges often rule for the government because they're hoping to get appointed to prestigious post-retirement jobs that the government controls.
It's the golden parachute problem. You play ball now, so you land soft later.
Precisely.
Well,
If the referee is hoping the team captain will hire him after the game, he's not going to call a foul.
but was there any good news in this section? I feel like we need a win.
There is one bright spot: audits.
Okay, tell me about the Brazil audits.
So Brazil did this program where they randomly audited municipalities for corruption. But, and this is the key, they didn't just file the reports. They released the results on the radio.
They broadcast the dirt.
They did. And it worked. Corruption dropped. Corrupt mayors were voted out. This proves that information can break the cycle, but it has to reach the people.
Which brings us to our next pillar. If the radio saved the day in Brazil, that means the media is crucial. This is what the researchers call diagonal accountability.
Right. Diagonal because it's not up-down like voting, and it's not side-to-side like the courts. It's the media and civil society coming in from the angle to hold power accountable.
But just like the courts, the media can be captured. And there is a story in the sources that I literally couldn't believe. The Peru takes.
The Vladimir Montesinos story. It's a classic.
So this guy, Montesinos, was the secret police chief in Peru. And he bribed everyone, judges, politicians, newspapers. But he didn't just bribe them, he videotaped himself doing it.
He kept receipts, literally.
And when researchers got a hold of these tapes, they found something fascinating about the price of the bribes.
This is the key insight. He paid the judges about, what, $2,500 to $5,000 a month. He paid politicians a similar amount. But the television stations,
How much?
millions. One TV channel owner was getting over $1.5 million a month.
So a TV station is worth 100 judges?
Effectively, yes. What this tells us is that controlling the narrative is infinitely more expensive and more valuable to a corrupt regime than controlling the law. If you own the TV, it doesn't matter what the judge says because the people will never even hear about it.
That is terrifying. It shows where the real power lies. And the sources also mention that governments don't just use bribes, they use advertising.
Yes, in Hungary and Argentina, the government allocates state advertising budgets. If you're a friendly newspaper, you get huge ad buys. If you criticize the government,
You get nothing.
you get nothing. It's a way to starve the opposition media into silence without ever arresting a journalist.
It's economic censorship. And then, of course, you have social media, the Wild West.
A double-edged sword.
Yeah.
The sources cite a paper literally titled "Facebook Causes Protests." So it helps people coordinate. But it also spreads misinformation and polarization. It can help you find the truth, or it can lock you in an echo chamber where you never see the corruption in the first place.
So let's recap the architecture so far. We have toxic resilience keeping people quiet. We have violence and fraud breaking elections. We have bribes breaking the courts. And millions of dollars breaking the media. It feels like a fortress.
It is a fortress.
But surely there are people whose entire job is to help the poor. Social workers, NGOs, the helpers. Why haven't they fixed it?
This is where we turn to our final source, the article by Steven Stoffler. And this is perhaps the most heartbreaking part of the analysis. It's about the helper's dilemma.
The article talks about poverty, blindness, and social work. What does that mean?
It means that even the professionals trained to fight poverty often focus on the symptoms, not the disease. They focus on fixing the individual, helping a family get food stamps, helping someone find a job.
Which is good work.
It is essential work. But the source argues that by focusing only on the individual, they ignore the structural inequality, the rigged courts, the vote buying that caused the poverty.
And why do they do that?
Learned helplessness.
We usually hear that term applied to victims.
Exactly. Usually we say the poor have learned helplessness. But Stoffler argues the social workers have learned helplessness. They look at this massive, corrupt architecture we've just described, the violence, the bribes, the millions of dollars, and they feel powerless.
They feel like they can't change the system, so they just try to make the victim a little more comfortable inside the system.
Correct. The source suggests that by doing this, the helpers might unintentionally be maintaining the status quo. They are applying Band-Aids to a wound that requires major surgery because they don't believe the surgery is even possible.
That brings us full circle, right back to the flood. The social worker is there handing out towels to the people waiting in the water. The people are laughing because they are resilient, but nobody is going to the palace to ask why the dam broke.
That is the architecture of dysfunction. It's a self-reinforcing cycle. Toxic resilience meets learned helplessness, all taking place inside a structure where the doors, the elections are locked, the referees are paid off, and the windows are painted over.
It's a very sobering picture. So what does this all mean for us?
I think it forces us to rethink what we applaud. We love stories of resilience. We love stories of making do. But we have to realize that true accountability requires more than just survival.
It requires breaking that cycle of reciprocity where you sell your vote. It requires demanding information, like with those Brazil audits.
And it requires the helpers to stop just treating symptoms and start challenging the structure. The sources tell us that vertical, horizontal, and diagonal accountability are all interdependent. You can't just fix one. You need the media to report on the audit so the voters can fire the politician who bribed the judge. It all has to work together.
It's a massive challenge, but understanding the blueprint, seeing how the machine works, that has to be the first step to dismantling it.
Absolutely. Knowledge is the only thing that pierces the fog.
Before we go, I want to leave you with a final thought, a final question from our expert here.
We started with that image of the laughing flood victims, and we called it resilience. But I want to ask you, if resilience is actually a form of compliance, does staying strong sometimes get in the way of fixing the problem? At what point does adapting to a malfunctioning system become part of the malfunction itself?
Something to think about the next time you hear someone praise the resilient spirit. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Look at your own systems with a critical eye, and we'll see you next time.